Program funding for the Organic Odyssey was provided by the California Certified Organic Farmers Foundation, as well as the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. Visit their web pages or social media for all their amazing content and guidance on everything organic. Support for the Organic Odyssey is provided in part by the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research at Cal Poly. For more information or to support the center, please visit organic.calpoly.edu. That's organic.calpoly.edu for the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research at Cal Poly. Support for the Organic Odyssey is provided in part by AgCom Central. Visit AgCom Central on twitch.tv or youtube.com for all content ag-related. That's AgCom Central on twitch.tv or youtube.com for AgCom Central.
Welcome back to the Organic Odyssey. I'm your host, Madison Jasso.
And I'm your co-host, Abel Aguirre.
And today we have a couple guests with us. We have two here in the studio and one on Zoom. So if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Emmy Marrow, and I'm a first-year agricultural communications student here at Cal Poly.
I'm Dr. Matt Grisham, the director of the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research. And on Zoom we have...
And I'm Joel Leonard. I'm a former Cal Poly student that now works for Sun Pacific Farming.
Thanks, Joel. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Joel's a member of the Grimm Center Advisory Committee as well. We're really happy to have him on there.
Lovely. So today we will be talking to Joel about his time here at Cal Poly and what he has been doing after he graduated. We will also dive into organic citrus and permanent crops. So, Mr. Leonard, what do you want to give us a little rundown of what your story, how it starts here at Cal Poly?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually went to Cal Poly originally for mechanical engineering, and unfortunately decided to switch after making it through all of the math classes. But once I did, I switched into ag, and not only was much happier, but kind of found my true calling. Through my time at Cal Poly, I not only worked on campus at the campus farm, but I also worked as a research assistant for a couple of the professors on campus, as well as the the SIP program, Sustainability in Practice, with some of the wineries in Paso. I really enjoyed my time at Cal Poly, kind of found what I was passionate about in entomology with the former professor, Dr. David Hedrick, and actually went on to get my master's in focusing on the evaluation of pheromone mating disruption for California red scale.
Yeah, we have written down that you were doing the evaluating of the pheromone. Do you want to go in a little deeper on that? Because I'm not really sure what that kind of is, if you want to explain what that is.
Yeah, so some insects require mating in order to reproduce, and a few select insects the female releases and excretes a pheromone that the male uses to find her. So in this particular insect species, the California red scale, the female is immobile, and once she settles down and starts to develop, she doesn't move, but the males fly in order to find and mate with the females. And they do that by following a pheromone trail that the female is secreting. So what we do in the industry is we synthetically reproduce that same pheromone and release it out into the orchard. And it creates not only false trails, but also just an overwhelming plume of pheromone. So the males get confused and are unable to find the females, leading to the lack of mating and a population decline over time.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a great, actually mating disruption is probably my favorite pest management approach outside of biological control, because it's incredibly low impact. The pheromones are very species specific, and really you're not killing anything. You're just preventing the next generation. So, but yeah, it's a great.
So you were doing the research on that here when you were a student at Cal Poly, right? Or no?
Yeah, so my advisor Dr. Hedrick actually connected me with a group out of UC Davis and UC Riverside that worked in the Central Valley. And they were doing some testing there as part of a USDA grant. And I just kind of got really excited and passionate about it and took it a step further into commercial trials, which, yeah, I did and ran when I was at Cal Poly.
Wow, so we have another Cal Poly alumni that's representing Cal Poly
Yep.
real well. Okay, so now we're talking about organic citrus. So, Dr. Grisham, do you want to explain what makes citrus organic?
Well, it's just the way it's grown. If it's grown in accordance with the National Organic Program, so that the standards. So it's, like all our crops that we grow organically, what that translates to is what types of inputs you can use, as well as what you're doing around promoting soil health and biodiversity in your system. Those are parts of certification as well. But Joel's really the expert. So I'm sure he can talk about it quite a bit more.
Yeah, go
No,
ahead.
I mean, I think you're definitely correct. We're actually coming up on our annual organic audit here in a couple of weeks, and a lot of the questions that we get asked and the things we're supposed to focus on during this audit to make sure we're in compliance is exactly what you said. It's a lack of synthetic chemicals, so making sure that all of the pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers that we're using are naturally sourced, as well as focusing on a maintaining or improvement of soil health. And, there's other caveats of biodiversity, non-GMO, but the main focus is a lack of synthetic chemicals and soil health.
So Joel, what, as you've been working sort of at the forefront of a lot of organic citrus, and Sun Pacific is one of the biggest organic permanent crop companies in California. For citrus specifically, what have you viewed as the biggest challenges for growing certified organic?
Yeah, I think in my experience, there's two hurdles. One, which I can't do much of in the field, and that's a lack of sales. Organics is great. It's fantastic. We've been producing a lot of organic product over the last few years, but we're really struggling to get it to sell. And a lot of buyers are telling us that, there was a lot of buzz early in the start of organics many years ago, and it's kind of dying down, people focusing more on a better deal. And that's tough in organics because it inherently costs more, as we're using a lot of practices that are more labor intensive or, focused on chemicals that are potentially less efficient, causing us to use more. Mm-hmm. So the sales side is definitely an issue right now for us. But the other end of it, I kind of alluded to, is the poor efficiency of certain chemicals and fertilizers and things that we're using organically. Synthetic fertilizers, synthetic chemicals, and pesticides, herbicides are very specifically tailored to do one job, and they tend to do it really well. Using and focusing on natural alternatives, while it does have its benefits, it's also kind of inherently inefficient, and that means that we have to apply more, and that costs us more. So they kind of go hand in hand. Organic farming is not cheap, but it definitely pays off when the market is willing to take the fruit and spend the money. But with all the challenges I think we're going through right now, it's hard to get people to pay that extra dollar for a piece of fruit that's been produced organically.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that's probably the biggest challenge right now?
Absolutely. I feel like we're learning, and Cal Poly's been at the forefront of learning more about chemical efficiencies, specifically fertilizers in organics, and how efficient they are and how to make them more efficient. And that issue has kind of been tackled in my mind. I think we're at the point where our organic producing crops tend to actually match or exceed the production we get from conventional crops because we're focusing on inefficiencies. But what that means is the prices go up. As we realize some fertilizers aren't 100% efficient, they're 80% efficient, we end up applying more, which costs us more. And until the market's willing to bear the cost, it is a huge challenge right now with the long-term, survivability, I guess, of growing organic crops. It's hard to turn a profit as it is. It's getting really hard to turn one organically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally see why that's an issue, because on like the consumer side of that, as a college student, like
Yeah.
paying the extra
Absolutely.
buck, I don't know if I'd be willing to do that.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening so far, folks. We're going to take a quick break to tell you about an upcoming field day. Triple F Ranch, outside of Hanford, California, is having their second annual regenerative on-farm field day on February 26th of 2026. The program runs from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. There'll be lots of speakers as well as on-farm demonstrations. If you'd like to learn more about this event, you can read about it at our website, organic.calpoly.edu. Again, that's organic.calpoly.edu. Click on our Events tab, and this event, as well as other events, will come right up. Now, back to the show.
So what are some of the crops that Sun Pacific produces organically?
Yeah, so Sun Pacific, many years ago, we went in pretty hard into table grapes. Mm-hmm. So the majority of our table grapes are organic, but we also produce citrus, kiwi, and avocados organically.
Wow. So now that we learned a little bit more about the science behind the organic citrus and all that, Dr. Grisham, what is a permanent crop?
Oh, yeah. So permanent crops essentially are sort of the converse to annual crops. So annual crops are crops that you plant every year. And a permanent crop would be a crop that you plant once every, 10 at the very short end, 25 for a lot of modern high-density fruit, and then sometimes as much as, hundreds of years. So, olive trees would be like the probably best example of a really, old permanent crop, in that many olive orchards in Europe and the Middle East are thousands of years old. So, and some grapevines, for example, especially wine grapes, can be hundreds of years old. So, but really, it just means a perennial or a crop that you don't replant every year.
That's incredible that a crop can last that long.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
So typically it's, trees and vines. Some shrubs, blueberries would be an example of more of a bush, or caneberries would be more bushy than.
Now, is there any like environmental benefits with permanent crops, or is it kind of just like you can't really help it? Like, I don't know how to explain.
Well, Joel can probably comment on that as well. What are the things that you think are more forgiving about permanent crops versus annual crops, and what are some of the things that are more complicated?
Yeah, I definitely feel like, having experience in both, I did a lot of cotton out on the west side, and tomatoes. Permanent crops, I think, inherently are just a lot more forgiving. Because there's a year over year effect, they tend to mine from the soil a lot better. It's not so much pedal to the metal, 100% on the gas, trying to get this crop to grow and produce and then tear it out in 9 months. You're kind of looking at a long-term life. Like, as you said, we have some citrus groves that are over 150 years old that are still at peak production. And it's more just, the ongoing care. And I think it tends to be a little bit easier on perennial crops. Obviously there's a lot of downsides, but I feel like soil conservation is better in a permanent cropping system, because you don't have the soil erosion that you would in an annual crop. Permanent crops are pretty much no-till systems. You're not ripping up the ground in order to come back with another plant. And with that, you're sequestering a lot of carbon. There's a lot of carbon dioxide that gets fixed and stored as biomass or in the soil in a permanent crop that, you just don't get in an annual crop.
Yeah. it cycles faster. I would say, one of the big advantages of an annual crop versus a permanent crop is, well, I used to joke about this with orchardists that I worked with. It's, you might get, say it's a 25-year high-density fruit crop, you might get 2 rotations in your life. If you start farming in your 30s, then 50 years would be 2 rotations. So
Wow.
you're probably not going to be around much longer than that. Whereas annual crops, in any part of the country, you get a new chance every year and you can rotate. In places like California, where we can, pull 2, 3, sometimes if it's a really fast crop, 4 or 5 crops a year, you can adapt very quickly to changes in market conditions. Also, if, say, a new invasive pest comes into the scene, a new invasive pest or disease complex like citrus greening and the Asian citrusillid, you can adapt away from that. Whereas if you're in a permanent crop, it's, if it was almonds or mandarin oranges this year, it's probably going to be almonds or mandarin oranges next year. The other thing that from a pest management perspective is that because permanent crops are much more stable, you run into a lot of pest issues that are really well adapted to those plants. And oftentimes they're adapted in such a way from the plant's point of view, they may not even be a pest. So, I'd use a lot of fruit feeding moth pests, for example. For the plant to sort of feel pain from a fruit feeding pest, it's got to destroy all the seeds. Because otherwise, the plant's going to express resistance through generations. If you mess with a plant's reproduction, you've given it ample motivation to figure out a solution to work around you. But if all you're doing is, eating, say, the flesh of the fruit, the plant has no reason to care, because that fruit's still going to develop, and in a natural system, it would still fall on the ground, and a bear or a raccoon or something doesn't care if there's maggots in fruit. We care if there's maggots in fruit. So that's a long way of saying that I see in a lot of permanent crops, there's some really stubborn or recalcitrant pest management issues that because you can rotate and because annual crops tend to be just more ephemeral or short-term in the environment, there's things you can do that you can't in a permanent. But Joel can comment to that as well.
No, I think you're spot on. A great example of that is California red scale.
Yeah.
It's a nuisance pest because it appears on the fruit and it makes it hard to sell, but it really doesn't affect the plant at all unless you get into crazy high populations.
Right. Yeah. Whereas, if you have an aphid on a fast-growing lettuce plant or something like that, it's directly impacting that plant's photosynthetic potential, and the plant, therefore, has a real reason to try to mount a defense.
So would you say there's more economic advantages with having permanent crops or annual?
Oh, I think it's such a nuanced question. I think, land value really comes into it. One thing that we're seeing in a lot of permanent crops is this move to higher density plantings. And that's caused, so for example, the apple industry right now is suffering an amazing glut of product. They have all this product and there's not enough people to buy it and eat it, which causes the price to collapse. And that really has come on the heels of high density apple production where, the yield per acre has gone up a factor of 4 or 5, maybe 10 times. So as those orchards, as people have moved to those orchards, there's a lag period. It takes 3 to 4 years before those orchards really start producing, just for this one example. But then suddenly there's just way more fruit than again, buyers. And so you end up in a real hard position. So I think that's one of the challenges. Actually, wine grapes are a great example of that right now. The younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, are not drinking wine as much as previous generations. And there was this massive planting of vineyards in response to the demand of the previous generation. Well, what we're seeing right now in California, wine grape industry is big buyers like Gallo are backing out of contracts it's because they can't move the wine they already have. So this year's grapes really don't have value to them. So I think that's one challenging thing. Again, with an annual crop, you can adapt and change a little bit faster. The other big, and this gets into sort of how dense a planting you have in a permanent crop, but the startup costs can be really large for vineyards and high density tree fruit. It really starts at about, and my numbers are probably out of date, but $12,000 to $15,000 an acre to set up, and as high as maybe $60,000 an acre, just to because you're buying all of these plants, you're putting them in the ground, you may be building a trellis system, you've got to put in some kind of a permanent irrigation system if you're in the West, the Western U.S. So it's challenging. I think Joel, really brought up that you've got this nice consistent crop that you're going to have year after year, and that's great so long as your overall market doesn't shift. And so, for example, current inflationary rates and the price of food, and so Joel's managing a lot of permanent crops organically, but suddenly there's less of a market for them. You can't, he can't just, unless he's going to just completely walk away from it, it's hard to make that decision.
Yeah.
So.
Seems like a big commitment.
Yeah. And what ends up happening?
Yeah, thanks.
What ends up happening for us is, we invest an additional $1,500 to $2,000 an acre to farm it organically, and we lose a lot more fruit, due to insect damage or quality. And then at the end of the day, we can't sell it organically, so we turn it around and sell it conventionally, just to get close to breaking even, selling it at a loss. And I think that's what's tough is you're talking about a crop that we've committed, hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars into, and then at the end of the day, we can't sell it organically, and so we're kind of at a loss. Like you said, we can't switch immediately into another crop. There are definitely kind of cash crops in perennials, but that's a move over 10 to 15 years. It's not season to season. So if you make the choice to tear out an orchard and replant it into a different variety or a different commodity, yeah, you're talking $60,000 an acre, and several years until you get into production. It's a big hit. It's a lot of cost over a long term.
That's super interesting. You putting it into the perspective of like the grapes and stuff, that really like set it for me, all of like the challenges that could potentially bring. But looking into the future, how are farmers like you guys adapting to like climate change and water scarcity and all that?
That's a great question. I'm going to let Joel go on that one for sure.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this a couple of times. Mm-hmm. My viewpoint on it is a little bit different than I think what people will give you as a standard line. Like you had alluded to earlier on that high density planting. I think my focus and what I'm trying to push us towards and other industry professionals towards is this focus on high producing acreage. If we can take a standard orchard that would average, at peak, let's just say 20 tons of fruit an acre, and we can instead produce 60 tons of fruit an acre in a high density environment where we're focusing on, automating the irrigation and the fertilizer to split it up over the day into multiple irrigations or over the week, and we can get higher production for the same inputs, that right there is water savings. That's better efficiency. That's better land management. Long term, with the changes we have coming on water, what's happening is a lot of areas that don't have water rights, that don't have access to canals, that don't have pumping rights, that land is getting really, really cheap. And the land in areas where you do have water rights is getting a lot more expensive. And so I think over the next, 20 years, we're going to see a shift in where our fruit is grown. Mm-hmm. And in that process, we're going to have to be more efficient. We're going to have to produce more. And I think that should be the goal. If we can triple our yields for the same amount of inputs, the same amount of water, and the same amount of fertilizer an acre, we're effectively cutting our land usage by 2/3. We're cutting our water usage by 2/3. We're cutting our fertilizer usage by 2/3 and turning out the same crop. So I look at it and think that's the future. The future is going to be in better production, in better efficiency, into numbers that, previously we didn't think were possible. And we've seen it over the last 50 years in multiple crops. Table grapes went through it, wine grapes went through it, citrus is going through it right now, pistachios and almonds went through it. You reach a point where you realize if we tailor how we grow this just a little bit different, we can produce a whole lot more for the same inputs.
Yeah. That's one thing that I've really appreciated in our conversations, Joel, is you take a very you pay a lot of attention to margins, I think, is the way I'd put it. So, just like in our conversations about nitrogen budgets, it's like, okay, yeah, I can buy this fertilizer A for half the price of fertilizer B, but if it's 75% less efficient, I just cost myself money. Because it's not it's like, if you need a tool or something like that and you're going to use it day in, day out, and you buy a cheap tool, it was cheap, but it probably breaks. And then you have to buy another one. Or you buy a really nice tool and you can use it, over a long period of time. But with inputs, it's kind of the same. I mean, if a low efficiency input might be cheaper at face value, but if it's considerably less efficient than the high efficiency input, it's actually more expensive.
I feel like we don't see how much work and how many challenges that farmers really have to go through. My grandpa has almond orchards, and I hear him talk. We get our water from the DMC, the Delta Mendota canals, and for examples, there's challenges that aren't even in our control that we also have to deal with.
Yeah.
There's a smelt problem in the DMC, so they were closing off some water pipelines because they don't want to harm the fish or the smelt.
Right.
Are you guys facing the same kind of policy changes and shifts as farmers like that are at the same time?
And we're in the Central Valley, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's too different or if it's pretty much. I'm sure it's all kind of the same.
Well, it's somewhat regional. I mean, Joel, maybe you can provide some insight into, what are the, maybe more regulatory driven or out of your control challenges that you guys are facing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenges definitely will vary as you cross the state. We have much different issues in the Coachella Valley as we do, up near Yuba City or, in the Central Valley near Fresno or Bakersfield. It's kind of region specific. I mean, Sun Pacific's a pretty decently sized grower. Just us and our company, we sit in around 40 different irrigation districts, all that have different policies, different regulations, approach problems differently. And, even through the 3 different power companies that we sit in, there's vastly different rates. So in one area, what might be profitable is not profitable in another because, in some cases we're paying $2,000 an acre just for water. And in other cases, we're paying $50 for that same amount of water. So it definitely varies across the state, and there are changes happening constantly. I think what's tough is no one is really doing a good job writing it all down and explaining it very plainly. We benefit based on our size. We have people that are dedicated to these issues and that spend all of their time in meetings trying to understand the nuances of all of these requirements. But not everybody has that luxury. We farm in kind of a different bracket where we have the ability to go and buy water from a different region of California and transfer it along the way and bring it to us. Myself, as a 40-acre farmer, I can't do that. I can't go make water deals to make sure I have water tomorrow. And I think the stability is what really makes growing hard right now. You just don't know. If I need water today, are they going to open up the turnouts and let me take it? Or are they going to tell me I have to wait a month and my crop is going to die?
Yeah. Well, I think that scale issue you bring up is a really important one too, because I really feel like one of the things that is driving consolidation in a lot of our farming systems nationwide is regulation, because every new regulation that's added does exactly what you were saying. It adds something else that somebody has to keep track of. And if you're a small holder, you're you're the farmer, you're the irrigation specialist, you're the marketer, you're the compliance specialist.
Right.
You do everything, and there's only 24 hours in a day. So the answer to that is really scale, and that's one of the things I think has really pushed the scale up of farming. And yeah, it's not an easy problem.
I get the intention, right?
Yeah.
The intention was that we were going to regulate these big farmers, and we were going to make sure that they're being responsible. But the act of doing that almost ensured that the only people left are big farmers.
Exactly.
Because it is really hard to understand this. And I mean, myself, having 40 acres, the only reason why I'm comfortable with the long-term survivability of where I'm growing is because I'm in an area where we have almost unlimited water rights. And I paid dearly to get this land, $35,000 to $40,000 an acre.
Oh, man.
It's not like other areas of the state where you're paying $5,000 to $10,000 an acre.
Yeah.
So a lot of these family farms are in those cheap areas where a lot of the regulation is just kind of up in the air.
Yeah, having unlimited water rights is a blessing. That's
Absolutely.
that's real nice.
Yeah.
One thing that Mr. Leonard mentioned was that things are constantly changing, and what I found most interesting, what is changing, is all the new technology in farming. And have you guys bought any like new technologies like AI, like any of that craziness?
Well, Joel's a great person to talk to about that, actually. What are some of the technologies that you guys have been adapting or adopting?
Yeah, when I started out of college at Sun Pacific, they had just invested pretty heavily into like automated irrigation systems. And through running those projects and installing them, we learned pretty fast that there is a lot of just terrible quality products on the market that don't really have a good understanding of reliability or accuracy. And through my time at Sun Pacific, that's kind of been a pivotal focus. We're spending a lot of time and money to just understand, I want a flow meter. Is the flow meter that I'm going to pay for and install going to be reliable long term, and is it actually going to give me a benefit? And a lot of the market go-tos right now that people walk into an irrigation supply store and buy, they're not reliable.
Yeah.
And what's happening is you have a group of farmers that already kind of don't have trust with a lot of this technology, and they get sold a bill of goods that the products they're getting just don't meet. So we're spending a lot of time and money understanding, if I'm buying a flow meter, what of 15 different flow meter make, model, brands is going to be reliable and accurate. Because for us, we want to install 2,000 or 3,000 of them. So we want to make sure we're not wasting money installing something that has to get replaced. And unfortunately, that's the reality of ag right now. There is a lot of tech companies coming in thinking that, they know what they're doing and they're going to offer a solution for a huge markup. And at the end of the day, even in the last 5 years, I've seen dozens of companies come and go that got millions and millions in investment from outside sources and just fall away, because it's a hard market to make it into, and you really have to sell a product that works.
Yeah.
That's not going to be, constantly replaced. And that right now is a challenge. And we are looking at AI. One of the projects I'm working on right now is an irrigation planning tool. And, with irrigation, there's always a need to use water efficiently and save water. And we have all of this technology and data, but it's all in pieces. You have a soil moisture probe out in the field, or you have a pressure transducer telling you what the pressure is in the hose. You have flow meters at the reservoir. All of it is kind of in bits and pieces, but we need to bring it all together into a tool where it recommends a certain amount of irrigation, and then you can factor in your soil moisture probe to increase or decrease how much water you're going to apply that week. You factor in your plant, sorry, I can't think of a better word, your pressure bomb readings, the, what's the other term that they call that?
Water holding capacity?
Stem water potential.
Yeah.
You factor in those readings, you factor in, plant stress just visually, and you get to a better number. And we're actually in the middle right now of using AI to drive those models to understand what, the right amount of stress, what the high end looks like, what the low end looks like. Because all data is meaningless unless you have a bracket to view it in. You need a target. So all of the soil moisture readings in the world won't tell me anything if I don't know what wet means and if I don't know what dry means. And AI is really helping define that.
That's nice.
So my next question with that is, do you think farmers should kind of hurry up and get onto this train of like all these new technologies and AI? And if they don't, will they be falling behind, or do you think it hasn't made that much of an impact yet?
I don't think we're at the point where is far enough defined, or the understanding of what is good and bad has spread enough. I'm in a very fortunate place where we're willing to cut our teeth to understand it early. At this point, I would say we're a very early adopter into technology like this. And in doing that, we have to realize what works and what doesn't. And we end up spending a lot of money on stuff that doesn't work. Small farmers and the general farmer in California, I don't think I would highly discourage them from entering into kind of that tech space right now, because the market hasn't balanced. There's just way too many people selling poor quality equipment with really poor reliability. And if they enter the market right now, they're going to waste a lot of money, and it's going to turn them away from doing any technology ever again. And I've seen that firsthand over the last, 10 years. And I think that's going to continue until we have a really good balance and understanding. And I feel like we're at least 5 to 6 years away from being at a point where I would encourage any of my friends that farm to start looking at technology like we are.
Well, that's actually super interesting. I didn't know that. I thought that everybody was wanting to just get their hands on the new technologies and all of that stuff.
Well, I think, one of the things that really makes sort of that Silicon Valley model really difficult to apply in agriculture is that at its essence, all farming is local. And Joel's alluded to this multiple times. What works in one irrigation district might not work in another irrigation district. And that might be fully driven by price. It might be climate. It might be soil type. There's any number of factors that create that locality. And if you think about it, think about smartphones. Ultimately, you sell a lot of smartphones, right? It's a kind of a generalized solution to a set of problems that are very consistent. Can I text somebody? Can I look up on the internet? Can I get a GPS location of where I'm at? Can I take a photograph? And, the smart solutions to agriculture, I think irrigation is one place where there is some consistency across at least permanent crops, but you go into annuals and you're into a totally different system again. You can collect all this data, but if you can't translate that into a physical action in the world at the appropriate scale, both in time and space, it doesn't really help you. There's been a lot of work for specialty crops looking at automated harvesting. And, crops like carrots and potatoes, green beans, you can harvest pretty easily, much like you can corn or wheat or soybeans. I mean, you can use a big machine that essentially does all the work. But you get into delicate things like citrus or kiwis or apples or strawberries, and you can't run a combine over an apple tree. That's not going to end well for you. You can't run a combine over a grapevine. That's not going to end well for you. And then to actually harvest those crops, you need such an incredibly specific engineering solution that the market can't really bear the research and development to come to a solution that is, predictable and durable. And that's one of the big challenges I see for ag tech. Precision farming in commodity row crops, we were talking about that stuff in the 90s when I was in graduate school, and it's really only in the last 10, 15 years where it's really gone mainstream. And those are crops where you have literally tens of millions of acres of the same crop, the same crops. It's not a patchwork of, strawberries, carrots, lettuce, almonds, I almost said almonds, mandarin oranges, kiwis. Each one of those needs such a different approach. It just doesn't, it doesn't generalize very well. Maybe I'm blabbing on about it now.
I also feel.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I also feel like what I see is one of the biggest challenges in adopting new technology, or should I say, developing new technology, because we work hand in hand with a lot of companies just starting out to develop new tech, and we've done some with automated harvesting, and it's actually gone really well. But they all seem to fall into the very same issue. They're venture capital backed. They've gotten funding from investors, and it should be years and years of development to get to a product that's really stable. And they just want to jump immediately to the end solution. And there's been companies that, we just unfortunately had to let go because in the beginning it was cost effective for us to help develop their product and do trials with them. And pretty quickly they just say, you know what? We did some back of the napkin math with what oranges sell in the grocery store, and we realized you're making crazy amounts of money and you need to start paying us more. And, it's unfortunate that ag is kind of not really on the internet. I had just asked Microsoft Copilot, Microsoft AI, about purchasing costs and break evens on 20 acres of citrus. And it told me that you're making $20,000 to $30,000 on average per acre, which is just ridiculous because that number is more like $6,000. So it's taking the price in the grocery store and trying to equate that to how much the farmer makes. Right. And a lot of Silicon Valley tech companies are doing just that. They're going to the grocery store and they're saying $6 for a thing of strawberries. The farmer's making $2 million an acre. So we're going to bring in a piece of tech that costs, $500,000, and the farmer's just not going to buy that.
No, in most crops, I think, or in many crops, if you're getting 10 cents on that retail dollar, you're doing really well.
Oh, yeah. I think in strawberries, the California Strawberry Commission did a really, really good study showing that on average, a grower makes positive 3 cents to negative 2 cents per dollar in the grocery store.
Yeah. And there's all those links in the supply chain where money's going.
Yeah, I actually recently, when I was still in high school, I did some research for this project I had to do, and I was talking to a local almond farmer that wasn't my grandpa, and he explained to me that that farmers don't make as much getting back as you think. The growers, the statistics that Joel just said, he said that same one, I think. And as a consumer, that's crazy because you think they're making all this money, but it's all the next people, right? Don't they make more money? You, for example, almonds, you have them and then they go to the processing, and then it kind of just gets less and less as it goes, and then it goes to the stores. And
well, wheat's a great example. So you can look. I don't know what the current price for a bushel of wheat, but a bushel of wheat is 40 some pounds, and it typically hovers between $4 and $5 for 40. That's what That's what a grower is getting for a bushel of wheat. How much does a box of Wheaties cost?
Like nowadays,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Six,
I was
$7,
gonna say $6 or
right?
$7 easy.
Right. And how much
Easy.
wheat are in those Wheaties? You know, is there 40 pounds of wheat in those
Definitely
Wheaties?
Definitely not.
And so you can, that's an extreme example because it's a commodity crop that gets processed, but that it really isn't much different when you move into the specialty crops. There's all of these chains and there's all these links in the supply chain, and money's moving around. Plus, there's loss at every level. Especially, citrus is a fairly durable piece of produce, but less durable produce, there's a tremendous amount that just never even makes it. And that all, takes up some of that food dollar.
Yeah.
I'm not an economist, so I don't have great data to back this up, but it's a real issue and continues to be one.
Super interesting stuff that we just talked about, but we do have a game.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Every episode, we do have a game. So it is called Citrus or Fiction. So the rules are, I will read these statements about citrus and permanent crops, and you guys will guess whether they are true or false.
Okay.
Okay. So, first question. Joel, are you ready?
Oh yeah. Bring it on.
Oranges were originally purple.
I'm gonna go with false. I know
Yeah.
carrots were originally purple.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with false as well. I'm going to trust the experts on this one.
Yeah, I'm also going to piggyback on that.
I would probably trust the experts as well, but it is true.
Oh my goodness.
And it says some early varieties had a deep purple hue.
That's wild.
That is.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of, older varieties that are green.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, a
That
lot
makes
of,
more sense,
If
I
you
think.
go down to Mexico and Central America, a lot of the juice oranges they're bright green
Yeah.
when they're
It's
harvested.
like that makes a little more sense than purple.
And
to me.
purple, yeah.
But yeah, purple, that's crazy.
Yeah. Okay, next question or statement. Citrus trees need to be replanted every 10 years.
Well,
False.
false.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That one was That one was an easy one. Okay, this is a little fun one. Lemons float, but limes sink in water.
Oh wow.
I think I actually saw a TikTok or something about this. I'm not going to lie. So I think it's true, if I remember correctly.
I have no idea. Joel, do you have a?
I definitely think that's true. We have a technique in processing where you dump fruit out of a container into like kind of a water bath, and the fruit floats, and that's part of like the early cleaning process. And if I'm remembering right, it does not work on limes because they sink.
Oh, just look at that.
There we go.
This is knowledge because that one's true.
All right.
That was correct.
There we go.
All right, last statement. Spain produces the most citrus in the world.
I have no idea on that one.
They produce a lot. They didn't this year because of the floods and some droughts.
Mr. Leonard, what do you think?
I believe that is false. I think Brazil is.
Oh, Brazil.
Well, I don't know. It's probably close between Brazil and China at
Yeah.
this point.
That's correct. It is false, and Brazil leads in
Wow.
citrus
Brazil.
Hit that
production.
He answered
right.
it completely.
Wow.
Yeah,
he got 100%.
Hit
He's
the nail
the
right on
expert.
the head. Wow.
Well, that was super fun. I learned a lot, like I do every podcast, but I learned a lot today. I hope you listeners also learned a lot. Thank you guys so much for coming on. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Dr. Grisham. Thank you, Emmy. Thank you, Ava. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.
Program funding for the Organic Odyssey was provided by the California Certified Organic Farmers Foundation, as well as the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. The show was created by Matt Grisham, the talent coordinator and resident organic expert, as well as Moses Mike, the faculty production lead. The Organic Odyssey is a production of the AGC 225 class called Digital Communications and Agriculture. The student team that produced the show included Natalie Eubanks and Savannah Taylor, the directors, hosts Madison Jasso and Ava Rose, Storyboard editing by Avery Mulerath and the technical team: Isabella Anderson, Vincent Biller, Vivian Kimpora, Kendall Cook, Callie Granis, Carolyn Janes, Zach Collar, Emmy Lynn Marrow, Jack Oliver Roa, Sarah Purcell, Mason Riley, and Holly Rudnick. The guests for this episode included Joel Leonard and Emmy Marrow. The Organic Odyssey is a digital media collaboration between the Agricultural Education and Communications Department and the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research at Cal Poly. These credits were read by Chelsea Ann. Thanks for listening.